Yeah, so going back a little bit to, talking shop quickly, for cellists that are listening and are on the audition circuit,
Mhm.
this is actually interesting because you're both like in the process of taking auditions and
Mhm.
listening to auditions. So I'm really curious. Do you have any
Mhm.
thoughts or recommendations on what concerto is most effective? Because I mean, of course, the Dvorak is like kind of
Mhm.
the standard one, but
Yeah.
have you noticed recently like a wave of like people playing or choosing to play a different concerto, or just thoughts on that altogether?
Sure. So we, as a, uh, I guess as a one-person cello section, because usually when what I found best for audition lists is, and this is again, I like tangents, but what I found best for audition lists is I'll come up with a list,
Mhm.
and I'll forward it to the committee, be like, hey, what do you think? Should we
Mhm.
change some stuff?
Right.
And for example, I think that worked really well for our past 1 year cello audition that we just had.
Mhm.
Came with the list, and we only really had to change two excerpts. We just replaced one with another, and that was it. And so there's this trend of asking for either Dvorak or Schumann concerto as well as Haydn D. And I like that trend a lot. I do not do Dvorak, I do Schumann because I find Dvorak gets my heart rate up too much.
Mhm.
And again, one of the things that I focus on as I play auditions is relaxing, being the
Yeah.
most efficient artist as I can,
Yeah.
focusing on the musicality. And I feel like Schumann, the main things in Schumann are sound, phrasing,
Right.
and pulse. Because
Right.
obviously you can play something exactly in rhythm, but it sounds boring if you have a pulse going forwards and backwards.
Mhm.
The idea that, for example, with Heifetz, if you put a metronome, every five measures is going to line up exactly because he takes and gives time.
Yeah.
Um, so I find Schumann, for example, and I think there are a lot of people who are playing Schumann as well,
Mhm.
especially for a section audition. I don't want to like group all section auditions together,
Mhm.
and also not saying that you have to be a very soft player to play in a section. Um, but if you play like a soloist Dvorak concerto and it's for a section audition, and if that first note is just a little bit harsh, that's the first impression that the orchestra committee is going to get,
Yeah. Yeah.
and their first thought might be, "Oh, this might be too harsh for a section."
Mm.
Obviously, I'm in a different place because I'm only taking principal auditions right
Right.
now,
Right.
and so I I could make the argument for me getting away with playing Dvorak.
Mhm.
I just don't prefer Dvorak. I prefer how Schumann feels and
Mhm.
how after I play through the first couple pages of Schumann, I feel ready to play an excerpt. Whereas after Dvorak, I still feel like I'm in kind of pressing mode, and maybe
Yeah.
that's more of a me issue because I learned Dvorak when I was 12 and
Mhm.
have been playing it ever since. That's when I had a lot of tension issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas Schumann, I only learned in college, and that
Oh.
was when Mr. Leonard was working a lot on phrasing and
Mhm.
relaxation and efficiency.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's for me. I've heard actually when we had our last open, we just had, major concerto of your choice. We
Mhm.
had a surprising number of Shalomos, which
Oh, I
was
was okay. I was going to
interesting.
ask about. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's for the same purpose as Schumann. It's whatever's most comfortable to really sink in and start playing.
Yeah.
Because also with auditions, a lot of it is the idea that you have to turn on a dime kind of thing. Like you have to be able to play romantic concerto into a Beethoven five that focus on a couple different things, and then go into
Yeah.
Verdi Requiem, which is three other things that you focus
Right.
on.
Right.
And so Shalomo and Schumann allow you to feel like you just relax into that and get it into a positive mental space where
Right.
as Dvorak, it's much more about like, am I projecting enough? Am I
Yeah.
really, having Dvorak for me is about power and
Right.
clarity, whereas Schumann's much more about long line and sound. And
Yeah.
I'm very proud of my sound because it's
Mhm.
something that I've worked really hard on. And so I think that that's the thing that I want to show off first.
Yeah.
And so if you feel like your power and clarity are really impressive and you can get a really rich sound, 100% go with that. It's
Mhm.
whatever you're most comfortable with, whatever puts you the best for the first impression, but also the excerpts kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting you say that about like the fact that your heart rate goes up when you play Dvorak, because I think a lot of cellists would say the same about Schumann because it's
Yeah.
so exposed and you're like kind of on a tight thin rope from the very beginning with the shifts and everything. And I
Yeah.
mean, but I guess, if your strengths are geared towards like being very lyrical, like I'm
Mhm.
sure you are,
Mhm.
then it makes sense. But I mean, Dvorak,
Mhm.
I think most cellists would agree is still easier in a way to start just
Mhm.
because you're just able to kind of sink into it. I mean, of
Yeah.
course, like you said, you're like you want to find the fine balance between like
Mhm.
pressing too hard or like enough. But
Mhm.
that's a really fascinating take. I because I feel like very rarely do cellists say that they would rather play Schumann over Dvorak. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more subtlety in Schumann than there is
yeah,
in Dvorak, and
of
so I
course.
think that you can get away with a lot more in Dvorak, whereas in Schumann, it's like you said, a tightrope walk. But again, it
Yeah,
goes
yeah.
back to the idea that, at least for me, it's
Mm,
you have these two competing characters in Schumann. You have the more extroverted, kind of
mm,
slightly more aggressive character, and the more
right.
introverted, more
Mm,
subtle character.
yeah.
And so focusing on that, so and as Mr. Leonard once said to me, if you have to focus on the shifts, you haven't focused on the shifts enough in the practice room, kind of thing. And so it's one of those where like I know I had that. I was actually honestly playing Shalomo, and I had
Mm,
just played I had just found out I was going to play with Colburn Orchestra,
mhm,
which is this big honor. I think they changed this lately where now it's a concerto competition, but usually the teachers would select one person from each, essentially from each instrument, and they'd be playing a concerto. So I just found out about that. I played my um, jury,
mhm,
and it went badly. It went very badly, and
mhm,
so he was stern, but he was still supportive, and that
mhm,
was
mhm.
where that quote came from. But
Yeah.
basically, yeah, just the idea that, I mean, again, going back to whatever you're comfortable with,
Mm,
it's because I'll say Schumann.
mhm,
It sounds like you feel comfortable with Dvorak.
mhm.
Some person might feel comfortable with like Lalo or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
But something whatever puts you in the best position for that audition, I think is the right answer.
yeah. Well, and I will say Schumann, I think regardless of how you play it, it shows more so than Dvorak who you are as a
Mhm.
cellist and a musician because it's
Mhm.
so complex musically, and so I think if you can nail it, obviously, then it goes a farther, or it goes farther than playing Dvorak. Because Dvorak, I would say, because there's such a long tradition of Dvorak, I would say
Mhm.
that more or less people play it pretty much the same in many ways.
Exactly.
Like you don't want
Yeah.
to be offensive to it, so you keep to a tradition
Mhm.
of a certain way of playing Dvorak. So
Sure.
yeah,
Absolutely.